Argentina once tried to hide a dead woman, not a scandal, not a secret affair. And the more the state tried to bury her, the more powerful she became. I'm Arturo, and this is LatinLora. From Latin America's history to mysteries and true crime, to local legends whispering Latin intrigue, every tale is verified in archives before it reaches your headphones. Hit subscribe. Fresh revelations drop every week, ready for your next campfire debate. A truck waits in the dark, its engine humming like a restless animal. Inside, a wooden crate sweats in the cold air, the damp wood seeming to remember the river. The state writes custody, as if a word can tame what it is holding. Listen closely. Even when the details blur, the mechanism stays familiar. Receipts, signatures, transfer notes, locked doors. The men are scared not just of the corpse, but of what it stands for and what it might do to them if the story ever escapes. What follows draws on a mix of sources rather than only documented facts. Some of it is on record, some of it is disputed. Some of what you'll hear comes from Santa Evita by Tomás Eloy Martínez, often whispered about as one of Latin America's darkest novels, but we'll get to why later. It's a reconstruction, vivid, seductive, and dangerous if you mistake it for a court file. We're going to dive into that blur where reality and fiction touch, and I'll keep the border visible the whole way so you always know what the record holds, what's disputed, and what the novel dares to imagine. In the shadow version of events, men in uniform pass the crate hand to hand, not like cargo, but like contraband. Accounts from the period seldom name her directly. That absence is part of the design. A stamp hits a form, a seal presses into paper. Here's the central mystery, clear enough to hurt. Why does a nation lose its mind trying to control a symbol it cannot bury? Argentina tries to erase, and instead inadvertently elevate the power embodied by a single woman's memory. This isn't just a story about death, it's about the fear of power's memory. A woman becomes an altar, the altar becomes a weapon, and the state, always sure it can organize the world into files, tries to control devotion with receipts, signatures, seals, and locked doors. Argentina flinches, the archive whispers back, the stamp starts to sound like a heartbeat. Now we'll guide you through a novel that plays with fire, Santa Evita by Tomás Eloy Martínez. This isn't straight history. Treat it as a guided journey, part archive, part fever dream, circling real events, Eva Perón's death, what happened to her embalmed body, and the political crisis. As we go, I'll keep the line clear between what the record supports, what accounts dispute, what the novel invents, and what we can responsibly infer, so you don't confuse fact with fiction. This is why people quietly call it one of Latin America's darkest novels, and that's no exaggeration. The central argument is blunt. When the state cannot destroy a symbol, it weaponizes memory through bureaucracy and ritual. The core is grim and straightforward. A dead woman becomes more politically dangerous than most living people. From there, everything turns cold, procedural, bureaucratic, and cruel. The kind of cruelty that wears a tie and claims to be practical. Before she was a crate, she was a girl with a name long enough to sound like a prayer and heavy enough to feel like a sentence. Maria Eva Duarte de Perón. This matters when the body disappears. The record marks her death. July 26, 1952, at age 33, announced to the country with clock-like precision and the drama of a state ritual. Some accounts even note the exact minute, often 25 past 8 in the evening, because Argentina doesn't just mourn, it timestamps grief. Her birth teaches the first lesson. In class societies, paperwork is never just paperwork. It's permission. Up close, her origin is simple and harsh. She came from poverty in the Pampas, from Los Toldos, a quiet-looking place until you understand what it means to be born where the state doesn't respect you. The myth later acts as if she appeared out of nowhere, but she actually rose from older ground, older silences, older exclusions. That matters because the novel's darkness starts long before the corpse. It begins with a country deciding who counts as real and who has to fight to be remembered. According to the record, she's connected to the city through migration. In the mid-1930s, when she was still a teenager, she moved to Buenos Aires in search of acting and radio work. The capital teaches you how to smile while being sized up, how to speak while being ignored, how to turn your voice into currency. Radio, especially, is intimacy on a large scale, a whisper that becomes a crowd. In a country built on unequal listening, learning to be heard isn't vanity. It's survival turning into power. Now we reach a key moment, with one honest warning. On January 22, 1944, at a charity event at Luna Park for San Juan earthquake victims, Eva meets Colonel Juan Perón. What we know for sure is the event and the meeting. The details shift depending on who tells the story, who introduced them, how close they were, and whether it felt like destiny or chance. Notice the pattern. Even the origin story has many versions, because Argentina doesn't create myths without competing voices. They married in 1945, and romance soon became routine. Perón won the election in February 1946, and was sworn in on June 4, 1946, a date that matters because Peronism treats ritual like religion does. Eva was First Lady until her death, but First Lady is too polite a title for what Argentina went through. She wasn't just beside a president. She was building a bridge between institutions and the people they usually ignore. According to the record, her connection to labor power wasn't just a metaphor. She became a public voice linked to unions and the descamisados, the shirtless ones, the working poor who saw their hunger and anger in her. Supporters felt the state was finally learning their names. Enemies saw a disordered woman wearing perfume. Here begins the country's long habit of substitution. People stop debating policies and start debating them, saint or scandal, mother or monster, because it's easier to fight a symbol than a complex person. Then the Eva Perón Foundation appeared like a second government, faster, more personal, less accountable, more dramatic. The evidence shows its scale: floods of letters, large distributions, housing projects, aid to the elderly, a social assistance machine moving faster than state bureaucracy. But the same evidence reveals the shadow side: patronage, personalism, pressure on donors, and politics of gratitude. This is Latin American honesty. It can be both materially transformative and politically coercive, because power here often comes as a gift that demands a promise in return. Women's suffrage is another example where we respect truth without turning it into legend. In September 1947, women's voting rights became law in Argentina, and Evita became the face of that victory in public memory. The fight for suffrage didn't start with her, and the passage of the law can't be credited to one person. Her role came after building the Female Peronist Party and turning women into a disciplined political force. Then comes 1951, a year that still lingers in the streets. The push for her to become vice president rises from below, from union power and popular devotion, and it crashes against military resistance like a body hitting a wall. Here, the archive feels less like a clear path and more like a tense room. What pressures were applied, what private arguments happened, who threatened whom. We can't prove every whisper, but we can see the result. She steps back as her health fails, and Argentina watches a woman reach for formal power while the system reacts as if the idea itself were a sickness. On her 33rd birthday, she was given the title Spiritual Leader of the Nation. This wasn't just a decoration. It was the state trying to turn charisma into law, to bottle devotion like medicine, and hand it out by decree. Critics called it offensive. Supporters saw it as recognition. Either way, the meaning is clear. Argentina tried to make love official, and official love is always risky, because once devotion becomes policy, anyone who refuses it becomes an enemy. July 26, 1952. The announcement hits like an axe hidden in a sentence. Rain, crowds, closed doors, prayers, a city acting like it lost a relative, not just a politician. At the same time, the state is already planning what's next, because in Latin America, grief is never just private, it's infrastructure. Plans to embalm her are underway, and Dr. Pedro Ara arrives soon after her death, calm and ready to turn flesh into permanence. This is where the process turns into horror, because the process sounds clean until you think about the hands involved. Dr. Era and an assistant work through the night so the body can endure a wake measured not in hours but in national obsession. Hairdressers, manicurists, and beauty professionals are called to dress death like public memory. Drawing from both the novel and disputed accounts, Martinez asks, almost like a curse, whether anyone can preserve a life the way they preserve a body. Here, fiction and fact intertwine. The state, as documented, will try, because a preserved body is a symbol that defies time, but not all details can be verified against the record. Here's the detail that changes everything. Before the coup, the body was part of a ritual. After the coup, it became paperwork. The first sign wasn't a gunshot, it was an order, a transfer sheet, a custody ledger, a mislabeled crate on a loading dock, a clerk's signature that seems small until you realize what it allows, treating a national relic like inventory. The horror starts when a human becomes just an administrative object. The wake becomes a procession of bodies. According to documented accounts, she's shown publicly, then taken to Congress for a ceremony, and then, importantly, to the General Confederation of Labor, CGT headquarters, where her body stays for 3 years. Torches, parades, sold-out flowers, nurses helping fainting mourners. The nation turns mourning into choreography. At this point, Martinez's novel moves further into allegory. He highlights when Argentina replaces the human with the symbol. Once a symbol is sacred, it becomes untouchable. Once untouchable, it becomes usable. People stop asking what's true and start asking what's faithful, an effect exaggerated in fiction, but based on reality. But here's the positive, and it matters. We don't treat Latin America like a freak show. The same instinct that creates myth also creates moral memory. Even when institutions fail, the streets remember. Even when newspapers lie, Kitchens and unions keep the testimony alive. This persistence might look like obsession, yes, but it's also resistance, a refusal to let power have the final say on what mattered to the poor, and a refusal to accept that truth can only live in archives. Then, September 1955, a military coup overthrows Perón, and the new regime criminalizes Peronism and targets its symbols. Here, the central mystery tightens its grip. Why does a nation lose sanity trying to control a symbol it cannot bury? Because now the state is not fighting a living woman. It is fighting absence, the kind of absence that still organizes crowds. The body in the CGT is no longer remains. It is an engine, a rally that can happen without a speech, a shrine that can outlast decrees, and the regime, terrified that pilgrimage could become resistance, chooses the ugliest compromise. The record shows a brutal, practical dilemma. Destroying the body causes the martyrdom label to spread faster than censorship. Burying it publicly creates a permanent rallying point. So the state chooses secrecy, managing the symbol by making it disappear. This is the novel's second cultural error, treating secrecy as if it were normal speech. When the public sphere is threatened by fear, rumor becomes a survival tool. That's not foolishness. It's an adaptation. But adaptation has a cost. Eventually, codes start to replace truth. Reports say the body disappeared from the labor headquarters in late 1955, and suddenly Argentina became a hall of locked doors. Rumors raced. The River Plate, sealed coffins, fake burials, secret transfers. Notice what's happening. The state seeks to render the body unreadable, and people respond by becoming secret archivists. They pass stories hand to hand, like soldiers passing the crate. This is how trauma is remembered when institutions block clarity. It's also how paranoia can become culture if you're not careful. Now we enter Santa Evita, and I'll be clear. In the novel, Martinez gives the state a face and a mind, showing institutional fear through characters and scenes that aren't court records. He turns Buenos Aires into a maze of corridors and closets, dark streets, and anonymous apartments, and he makes bureaucracy a monster that eats men from the inside. This is where the book's darkness feels distinctly Latin American. Not Gothic castles, but office floors. Not vampires, but stamps. Not curses, but forms that say custody, transfer, classified, as if paper could take a national wound. In the novel, custody becomes contagious. The men assigned to handle the body start circling it like moths around a flame they claim to hate. Desire and devotion turn into fixation. Fixation becomes possession. This is the third cultural error Martinez suggests without preaching, the eroticizing of power and suffering when politics feels personal, as if romance, humiliation, revenge, and cruelty are just part of the story. Then ordinary men who might have had normal lives become caretakers of horror, one signature at a time without ever admitting what they've become. That's why the novel feels so cold. Horror is not only violence, it is paperwork. A signature becomes a sin, a receipt becomes a confession, a stamped form becomes a spell that says, this body belongs to the state now. We understand this in Latin America because paper has decided our lives. Whether you exist, whether you can work, whether your land is yours, whether you're dead or counted. The novel is dark because it shows how institutions preserve their self-image. We are being practical while committing moral crimes that would be unbearable if described in plain language. Then the doubles appear, wax copies, decoys, replicas. Here's the honest truth. As literal history, this is disputed and lacks full scholarly consensus. But as a story, it's brilliant because it turns the nation into a mirror maze. If you can't tell what's real, you can't organize grief. Confusion becomes control. The copy becomes stronger than the original because the copy is what the regime wants most, uncertainty that feels like truth, and truth that feels impossible. Martinez writes again and again that memory betrays. He says nothing is ever just one story, but a web each person weaves without fully seeing the pattern. That's the book admitting its method. It won't give you a clean map because the map itself is part of the battle. The state creates silence, people create versions, the novel creates a shape that feels like the truth of living inside that fog. This is why the darkest reputation sticks, not because the novel is like confusion, but because it won't comfort you with certainty where trauma has torn the record apart. It mirrors how societies remember repression, fragments, contradictions, convenient legends, and the heavy absence of what no one dared write down. Then it offers a bitter truth in a sentence. A phrase can be false as fact, but still true in its power, because it moves crowds, reshapes fear, and outlives those who try to ban it. Now, one of the novel's most famous episodes, and again, I'll be clear, it's an invention in the book's design. In the novel, the body is hidden behind a cinema screen, and a child is told the embalmed woman is a doll. The child names her Poupée, talks to her, loves her, and feeds her movie plots like lullabies. This isn't confirmed history. It's a literary device, beautiful and disturbing, meant to show how state secrets seep into everyday life, especially working class life, where people become unwilling keepers of political violence. A child becomes gentle hands holding a hard crime. Notice how that feels in your stomach. That's the point. The cinema is where the neighbor goes to dream, to escape hunger and shame for a few hours. Martinez turns it into a storage room for the regime's fear. He's not saying, look how spooky. He's saying this is how power recruits the innocent without ever admitting it. The tenderness is real, and that's why it hurts. The child isn't foolish. The child is surviving in an adult world where truth is withheld like bread. The novel also connects with other Argentine works. This is part of its structure and ethical weight. Borges presents the idea of the simulacrum, staged mourning around a doll, and satire that can become an unintended tribute, depending on who you are. Rodolfo Walsh appears with That Woman Never Named and The Colonel Who Hides Her. These are literary works, not court evidence. But in countries where regimes censor, literature becomes a second archive. Sometimes it's the only archive that survives intact. This isn't romanticism, it's a survival tool for memory. Now, back on solid ground, here's what the record lets us say about the body's later journey. Modern accounts say the body was hidden in various places, then smuggled out and buried in Milan under the false name of an Italian widow, Maria Maggi de Magistris, in Musacco Cemetery. If you want real horror, look at the details. A name tag, a burial record, a fake identity. The same bureaucratic tricks used to control the living now control the dead. The state doesn't just move the corpse, it files it under someone else's name. In September 1971, reports say the body was dug up and taken to Juan Perón in exile in Madrid at Puerta de Hierro, where he received it with a strange mix of devotion, politics, and pain. Again, the crate crosses borders like contraband, and the men around it act as if the body could accuse them. That's what symbols do when a regime tries to own them. The symbol starts to own the regime's conscience, even if the regime claims it has none. Later, the remains were returned to Argentina and placed in the Duarte family tomb at Recoleta Cemetery inside a heavily reinforced vault built to prevent theft. Think about that for a moment. A corpse becomes infrastructure. Steel and concrete poured around a woman as if the nation is trying to dam its own memory. And still the question remains, like a stamp you can hear through walls. Why can't they just bury her like anyone else? Because anyone else doesn't reshape the political imagination of a continent. So let's tell the whole truth, not just the mistakes. Yes, Santa Evita reveals cultural errors, replacing people with symbols until complexity is forbidden, normalizing secrecy until rumor becomes survival's language, eroticizing power until cruelty seems inevitable, forcing everyone into performance until institutions become theater and trust falls apart. But it also shows our region's strengths, a fierce memory that refuses to be buried by decree, and the creative truth-making that arises when courts and newspapers fail to protect testimony. The danger is conspiracy. The gift is storytelling guided by empathy and evidence. And now we end where we started because the circle is the shape of ritual. A truck at night, a crate sweating in the dark, men passing contraband with shaking hands, a form stamped like a verdict, a key turning in a lock. The state thinks it can close the case. But Argentina isn't a filing cabinet. Argentina is a storm that keeps receipts in the body. The real mystery isn't just where she went. It's why everyone, supporters and enemies alike, needed to possess her even after death, as if owning the symbol could heal the nation's fear. Now I want your honesty and not sensational. When a novel like Santa Evita blurs truth and invention to tell a political reality, do you see it as an ethical warning about how power manipulates memory, or as a necessary tool? Since the official archive was already a stage set, tell me which side you lean toward and which moment in this journey made you feel the ground shift beneath what you thought really happened. Muchas gracias. Thanks for trekking the hidden trails of Latin America with me. If tonight's story unsettled you, subscribe and ring the bell, because Latin America's most intriguing stories are far from over.